I think this game is underrated and not enough people have given it a shot. Bluefire is a 3D platformer that draws its inspirations from the 3D Zelda games, Metroidvanias like Hollow Knight, and difficult platformers like Super Meat Boy. A combination that sounds great on paper, right? So what about in practice? Well, yeah, I think they pulled it off nicely, so let's get into it. You first wake up in an abandoned lab full of dead copies of you, and get to play as this short, tunic-wearing dude loosely inspired by Toon Link from Wind Waker. Yeah! There's a little tutorial section with Dark Souls-style hints teaching you the controls so that you can familiarize yourself with basic platforming. You have access to a jump, a dash, and the basic sword strike for now, but there's more on the horizon. Before long, you'll unlock your shield ability, which lets you block damage, and more importantly, lets you parry you. But if I'm being honest, it's pretty dang hard to do so consistently. And in true typical Metroidvania fashion, as you progress through the several areas of the game, you'll keep unlocking new abilities that give you more and more freedom in your movements, such as wall running or a second jump, allowing you to get around to places you weren't able to get to earlier. You'll meet a mysterious character named Vaughn, who acts as a sort of guide throughout your journey, giving you a bit of exposition to the world of Penumbra, while also letting you know what your main objective is. Turns out the flying castle of Penumbra has been corrupted by Shadow, and you're the only one that can save it for some unknown mysterious reason. Completely original. I know. I'll go ahead and get this out of the way here and now. The story is not the reason you play Bluefire. The platforming is, and oh man, is it ever good. Back to Vaughn. This is also where he introduces you to the first void area in the game. Voids act as self-contained platforming challenges that will test your abilities and later on your patience. They range from easy to incredibly difficult, noted by the amount of stars on the difficulty rating shown on the little menu before entering them. And to add to this, the difficulty that you choose to start the game in does have an effect on the difficulty of the voids in one very important way. On the regular difficulty, void areas have checkpoints scattered throughout them that act as respawn points whenever you fall or die to one of the many traps you'll have to navigate around. This makes getting through them more manageable for the average player, i.e. me, since you don't have to start from the very beginning of the void each time you make a tiny mistake, unlike the hard and brutal difficulties. If you like a challenge and you're the type of player that really likes to perfect his platforming skills, then the hard difficulty is probably for you. Also, you can't swap between difficulties at any point when playing. You have to choose the difficulty you want to play at the beginning of the game, which is a bit of a bummer. Personally, I played on regular both times through, and I felt like they were absolutely challenging enough as is. In fact, there's one void in particular, Orian's Saw, that actually made me rage quit my first time through, something I rarely ever do in games. While there was difficulty in terms of just platforming through the area, one of what I think is Bluefire's main problems, and part of what upset me, was the camera's movement. Now, generally speaking, you have control of the camera with your right thumbstick, but every now and then, in voids specifically, the camera will automatically move ever so slightly without your input, leading to all kinds of weird camera angles that obstruct your view, making it impossible to react to obstacles or judge distances while jumping properly. This leads to all kinds of guesswork in terms of timing your jumps or movements, and is a total pain in the ass, since these challenges are already difficult enough without the camera blocking your vision. Now, I need to clarify, this isn't a problem for like 99% of the game, but there are some very specific areas where you'll notice it and probably feel the same way that I did. In any case, after rage quitting that day, I came back the next day refreshed and nailed it in like 5 tries tops.
Nice.
These void areas pretty much steal the show in terms of testing your platforming abilities and remind me a lot of levels in Super Meat Boy. It's too bad there isn't a death recap where you get to see all your little failed attempts play out at the same time once you beat it, like in Super Meat Boy, but you know, maybe in a sequel one day. Who knows? There's really nothing quite like the feeling of weaving all your movement abilities together with the exact right precision you need in order to get through some of these sections. Jump, dash, jump, spin attack, wall run, jump, like seriously, you need to experience this for yourself to understand just how great the platforming feels. While the void areas do represent a significant portion of the game, what you'll mostly be doing when playing is exploring areas for upgrades, fighting off basic enemies, solving pretty simple puzzles here and there, and meeting charming NPCs that usually either have a side quest for you or want to sell you something. Oh, and progressing the story, which there sort of is one, but as mentioned before, it's pretty light and isn't gonna suck you in like The Last of Us or anything. Not unlike Hollow Knight, most of the lore of the world is pieced together through conversations you'll have with NPCs and through little notes you'll find scattered throughout the levels when exploring, with the occasional cutscene thrown in for good measure. There is no voice acting, and frankly this kind of game doesn't really call for it. Instead you get grunts and cute little noises when speaking to on-ups, and really that's all you need when your characters are as charming as these little guys. I mean, look at this guy. He's a little on-up in a bunny suit. a bunny suit. And here's a little on-up in a conductor suit who's got a side quest for you. Turns out he's got a bit of a temper and got angry at his musicians during rehearsal, and they all ran off, and he needs your help to give them apology letters so they'll come back. Now, if you've ever had the pleasure of working with a musician, then you'll know this kind of thing happens literally all the time. It's a basic fetch quest, and frankly, most of the side quests in the game are variations on go find X item or person for me, which I think is perfectly fine considering it's optional content, and backtracking in this game doesn't feel like that much of a big deal since jumping and dashing around through these levels is genuinely fun. Your mileage will vary on this though, since there is quite a bit of backtracking to be done if you're looking to do all the side content, and unfortunately part of the main story will have you backtrack through a few of the levels you've already been through, and you might not be as patient or forgiving about that as I was. Thankfully, there is a point in the story where you'll unlock the ability to fast travel, and that speeds things up considerably, so maybe wait until then to tackle all your side quests. Another thing that makes the backtracking less painful is all the various upgrades you'll find. There are a few different upgrade systems at play here. You have your standard max health increase, which goes up by 1 heart each time you complete a void area. You'll also find weapons hidden away in chests throughout the game that have their own visuals and damage values. It's too bad you can't just choose the coolest looking swords without affecting how much damage they do, but they generally look cooler the better they are anyways, so it's not a deal breaker. You can also upgrade how much mana you have, which is used whenever you hold down your shield button or do puny, weak, insignificant ranged attacks. The other upgrades come in the form of new abilities, which you unlock mostly through story progression, and spirits, which are passive upgrades that take up slots in your spirit menu. While you can only hold 2 spirits at a time at the beginning of the game, as you do void areas and talk to a specific NPC, you'll be able to unlock more of them, allowing for a wide range of passive upgrades that range from increasing your jump height, to increasing your attack range, to doubling how much ore you find, Bluefire's currency of choice. As far as unlocking new abilities through story progression goes, you shouldn't have trouble encountering them with one exception. For some reason, Robbie Studios decided to hide the mandatory spin attack move in a location without telling you need to go there and without even letting you know that the move exists in the first place. The only way to know about it is through one of those random tips that sometimes pop up during loading screens or to stumble onto it by accident. I found this pretty frustrating my first time through the game since I didn't know where to go, as I simply couldn't reach where I needed to go next to progress the story with the tools I had available to me, and I had no idea that there was another ability I needed to go out and find. After about an hour of running around areas I'd previously been to, hoping to figure out what I was supposed to do, I gave in and looked up a guide, and that's when I first learned about the spin attack. I get that Metroidvanias are supposed to have you exploring and looking for things, but these kinds of games usually come with a map that lets you place pins or at the very least help you take mental notes to remind you of areas you want to return to later on. Bluefire doesn't have a map. It's an unusual choice, but apart from this one specific problem I had, not having a map was totally fine. It meant that I became much more familiar with the layouts of the zones on a personal level rather than always referring to a map to figure out how to get from point A to point B. And that's something I really ought to mention. The zones are all interconnected in the way you'd expect from a Metroidvania. You'll unlock shortcuts that lead to areas you've previously been to, and this kind of makes the whole castle of Penumbra feel like one big playground for you to run around in, as opposed to a collection of separate zones to go through linearly. Also, as mentioned earlier, you'll eventually unlock fast travel, which makes getting around faster than your average YouTuber can say like and subscribe. Combat in Bluefire is pretty straightforward. You've got your typical 3-hit attack combo, the ability to attack while in the air to hit airborne enemies, an exceptionally weak ranged attack that costs mana, a shield that also costs mana to use, and the ability to parry with very specific timing. I mean, I couldn't pull it off consistently even on my second playthrough, and I genuinely tried to parry every single sword swing or thrust that came my way. Basically, every fight with non-boss enemies devolves to blocking or dashing out of the way of enemy attacks, and then getting 2 or 3 hits in before repeating the cycle until the enemy dies. Personally, I don't mind that combat was pretty simple. I didn't buy this game looking for deep combat, but if there's one area that I wish would be improved upon in a sequel, it would have to be combat. The enemies are just too static to pose a real threat, and they're more of an annoyance while platforming than actual encounters you'll want to engage in. Speaking of enemies that don't pose real threats, some of the bosses in the game are the same way. In fact, the first 2 bosses are entirely forgettable. I actually genuinely forgot they existed on my second playthrough even though it had only been a couple weeks since I last fought them, which is unfortunate because the ones that come after are way better, leading up to the last boss, which is absolutely the showstopper of them all. That boss is challenging and fun, but I won't spoil any more about that. If you're put off by how weirdly simple the first boss is, don't let it stop you from pushing on. The game gets better the further into it you get in pretty much every aspect except for visuals and the general vibe that the game has. That part they nailed right from the get-go. You've been watching this for several minutes now, you've seen what this game looks like at this point. The game wears its inspirations of Zelda and Hollow Knight proudly on its sleeve when it comes to how it looks and sounds. The soundtrack composed by Ariel Contreras Esquivel is sometimes beautiful, sometimes energetic, and sometimes playful at all the right moments. I mean, just close your eyes and listen to this main menu theme. What a mood. You know that first time you log into Genshin or boot up Dark Souls and you just sit there listening to the main menu music in awe? Yeah, that's what I did the first time playing Bluefire. And more than a few times since then. And that's not all there is to appreciate about the music. You remember those little musician guys from that side quest I mentioned earlier? They are musicians. They play the flute. As you approach them, the melody of the soundtrack switches to a flute version that gets gradually more prominent the closer you are to them. These little touches add to the atmosphere of the game in such a nice way that few games would bother to do. Another example of a nice touch is in the customization of your appearance. Throughout your adventure, you'll unlock new tunics that you can wear that have virtually no effect on the gameplay side of things, but just change up the way your character looks. Some are as simple as basic color swaps, while others that are locked away in hidden chests are really quite cool and, in my opinion, totally worth seeking out. These weren't a necessary addition to the game by any means, but damn if I'm not glad that they were included. Similarly, there is a built-in camera function that you can access at any point, pausing the game, allowing you to get the perfect selfie or landscape photo to use in your YouTube thumbnails. Oh, just me? Right. Well, anyways, it's pretty cool and there are several different filters you can use to change the way things look that you can play around with if you're into that type of thing. Again, not at all necessary, but cool nonetheless. Look, I admit it, Bluefire is not a perfect game, but I don't know, it's just a lot of fun. The platforming is exceptional, the visuals, the music, the characters, the atmosphere, it all comes together into one neat package that I have to recommend to anyone that's been looking for a modern 3D platformer to sink their teeth into. Coming in at about 10 to 15 hours, my biggest complaint of the game is that I wish there was more, and if that isn't the best compliment that a studio can get, then I don't know what is. If you end up picking Bluefire up, be sure to let me know how it goes in the comments. Thanks for watching, and did I mention that there's a completely free DLC that adds a new area to the game, doubles the number of void areas you'll have access to, and ends with another cool boss fight you'll definitely want to do to see the real ending of the game? No? Oh, oops.